Hey team, and welcome back to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we are going to talk about the magical electional opportunities that we are going to have available to us between our Taurus Lunar Eclipse on November 8th until our Sagittarius New Moon on a date that I actually did not write down. So 15 days from whenever the 8th is. It's a mystery, truly. I'll never be able to figure it out. Of course, I'm here with my co-host Lee, who is terrorizing my equipment and making things shake, and is probably the purring sound that you hear on the microphone sometimes. Some ASMR for you. And of course, Blossom is here as well. I don't know if you can see her very well. Got to slide her into frame. And then Ty is over there on the chair. So we've got a little bit of a full house here. But so fortunately, as we move past this lunar eclipse, we do start to open up some opportunities for talismanic elections. The past 6 weeks or so, there really hasn't been a whole lot to talk about insofar as elections go. So we've had to have kind of like different conversations about astrological magical topics rather than being able to share elections. But now it seems like in the last video for the solar eclipse in Scorpio, we kind of broke the seal as we had kind of our first electional opportunity that we've had in a while. Woody, come here. Let the world see you, see his little face. Look at your little face. Look at your little face. He's struggling. So we do have a few elections to talk about. Oh my gosh. See, he's just a terror. He's just like a little tornado, a little furry tornado that just wants attention and stuff. So I'm just gonna hold him here, and he's not gonna stay still because he wants to be a terror. But we're just gonna hold him here. Okay, all right. So we do have some options for some electional talismans. So we do have some upcoming elections for this coming 2-week period, which is really good because, like I said, we haven't really had a lot going for us in the near past, we'll say. So it's nice to be able to kind of break that seal and get back into the habit of these videos, kind of what they're here for. But even though we do have some elections, we are still kind of struggling to see some really good ones. So we're kind of having to make do in some ways with kind of what we have. And part of this is going to be hampered somewhat by the fact that we are in a waning moon phase. From full moons to new moons, right? And so whenever we're doing waning new moons, we have to think about and utilize talismans for purposes that are for waning purposes, for giving away, for taking away, for reducing, that kind of a thing. So we're looking for ways that we can constructively destroy things, essentially, to be able to make something new or better out of that space or that energy that is now left over. So that means that because we're working with a waning moon phase, we are kind of specifically looking for lunar mansions, especially that fit within that theme of a destructive lunar mansion, one that is more inherently focused on reducing or destroying or corrupting something. And also one that, while it can do that, can be channeled into appropriately constructive things, right? So here we're very focused on wanting to make sure that we can make something good out of the difficult times that we have to work with, of course. So there are only a few lunar mansions that can hit this kind of within the scheme of the lunar mansions themselves. And so for this 2-week period, we're gonna those lunar mansions that we're gonna be able to focus on that fit that criteria are gonna be the 9th, the 12th, and the 14th, because those are the more waning-ish, we'll say, lunar mansions that the moon is going to pass through this 2-week period. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're gonna have elections for all 3 of those. So this is kind of how we get to periods of time where there's not really a lot going on, because especially when it comes to lunar mansions, we want to make sure that the moon phase is especially paid attention to. It becomes a very high priority in a way that it isn't when we're talking about like fixed star or planetary talismans necessarily. Of course, the moon phase is going to be very important for like a moon planetary talisman, right? But like a fixed star and like a Saturn talisman or whatever, the moon phase isn't super important, but it jumps up in priority for lunar mansion talismans. So that's where we really kind of focus we really dig into those. So we're going to go ahead and talk about these. We're going to start with North America, then we're going to talk about Australia, and then we're going to talk about Western Europe because I kind of have bad news for Western Europe. And we can talk about that when we get there. But going ahead and getting started, our first electional opportunity is going to be for November 12th at around 8:52 p.m. is what this chart here is set for. And this is going to be an opportunity for a ninth lunar mansion talisman. Now, the ninth lunar mansion is kind of one of those more iffy ones. It is a lunar mansion that is a little bit more specifically associated with like the evil eye or other types or kinds of spiritual afflictions that maybe are not conscious ones, you know what I mean? Like the evil eye or those types of cultural hexes or whatever, thank you, Lee, can be cast in unintentional ways, right? So the ninth lunar mansion is kind of like that in some respects. But what we're going to use the ninth lunar mansion for in this election is for banishing, is for warding off, is for kind of canceling out or sending back or getting rid of spiritual attachments or afflictions that, of course, we don't want around us anymore. Oh, yes, lay down. Please lay down on my notes. I love that for me. There we go. No! I'm telling you guys, he is a furry twister. Just, aren't you? You're just a furry twister. There's Lee. Here's Lee. We'll try this angle for a second. So I have to like look here and at my screen at the same time. This is gonna be fun. Yosh. Okay, Lee. A nightmare. But there missed. There's Lee. Yay, Lee. So that's kind of the ninth lunar mansion in a nutshell, especially when we're talking about in a waning moon phase. In a waxing moon phase, we would tend to think about the ninth lunar mansion in regards to like spiritual barriers and protection, kind of that waxing, that gaining, that strength kind of aspect to it. But in a waning moon, we're talking more about like the banishing, the reflecting, the casting back, the getting rid of, the clearing out. That's really more the energy that we're looking for with the ninth lunar mansion. So in this chart for North America, we have the moon in the ninth lunar mansion on the ascendant, one of the positions we obviously really like to have her in. And in this chart, she's applying this trine to the sun. Of course, I always really enjoy the sun. I know that's like become the joke, and I think I mention that in every video, how much I enjoy the sun, or like sun-moon aspects in talismans, especially because they tend to be very super appropriate. So I'm like kind of clearing my space out here so I can make more room for stuff and adjust my light a little bit better since I'm trying to get Lee more in this. But the sun is really good for these purposes because the sun itself is very banishing. You know, it banishes the dark, it introduces light, it provides clarity, that kind of a thing. So we really like that. We like to keep that in as much as we can with this. At the same time, we want to make sure that the moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. She is averse to both, which is really great. And the moon is also the ruler of the first house, so we don't have to worry about like another planet, making sure that other planet is doing well. So all in all, this is a really great talisman for that. I really like that the moon in the ninth house, the moon in the ninth mansion is in her sign of dignity in Cancer. I think that's kind of like an interesting choice. And the sun moon trine is really great for that kind of power of banishing and cleansing, which is something that we could probably all use more of in our lives. Meanwhile, of course, Mars and Saturn aren't involved. And then we have the nice kind of angular Jupiter on the MC, at least for my location. Maybe you'll be able to kind of mimic that in your locations too. Just kind of providing an extra, we'll say like umbrella of support there. So interestingly, this chart is also what I would call like a 2-for-1 or like a kind of a double opportunity potentially, in that on the one hand, you can use this chart for the ninth lunar mansion like I just described, or you could potentially even use this chart for a Sirius fixed star talisman with the very same setup. Because in this chart we have the moon, the Sirius is at 14 degrees of Cancer, so we might want to, move this ascendant up a little bit to get 14 degrees on, so maybe much closer to 9 o'clock, like 8:56, so I think it was like, 4 or 5 minutes later in time, might be something that you want to look at, just to get that 14 degrees on the ascendant, because that is the degree that Sirius is projected to in the tropical zodiac. The moon is applying to that degree, and at the same time, the moon is applying to the sun. Now, normally, my rule for this is that the moon needs to apply to a planet to whom the fixed star is of the nature of. So like Sirius is traditionally of the nature of Jupiter and Mars. So typically you would want the moon to apply to either Jupiter or Mars for this kind of fixed star talisman, for this specific fixed star talisman for Sirius, because Jupiter and Mars are sort of planets that share some qualities or similarities with Sirius to help us kind of bring that energy down into the physical world, right? The sun is not Jupiter or Mars. I know that. You probably know that too. You may have read that somewhere. But I think that when it comes to Sirius and Regulus too, I think they have such strong kind of inherent solar connections to where an aspect with the sun here with the moon, or an aspect between the sun and the moon, can also serve the purpose. And I've used this. I've used the sun aspects for Sirius talismans a few times in the past and got really good results. Because you may or may not know this, but the Egyptians started their new year with the heliacal rise of Sirius. So there's this very strong kind of solar partnership, I guess we'll say, with between the sun and Sirius, because the heliacal rise is essentially it's a point in the sun-Sirius relationship where essentially the sun moves out of the way enough to allow Sirius to kind of come back and be visible in the night sky. So it's this very interesting kind of like sun connection that I think comes across very well in elections still, in a way that works similarly to how we would look for a planet that's of the same nature. So normally I want the planet that is of the nature of that star, but for like Sirius and Regulus specifically, I also think the sun works really well. So that's what we're using here. And then kind of those same rules apply. Saturn and Mars are not involved with the moon or the ascendant, so we don't have to worry about it. So this can make a good Sirius fixed star talisman. And things that we would look for Sirius fixed star talismans for, of course, are to bring honor and goodwill, especially from people in authority. So if you're working in any kind of situation where people in authority have to make judgments about you, whether that's like business partnerships, business deals, like an individual in authority of another company or of some other kind of entity, makes a yes or no decision. Sirius can be really good for that. Whether or not you're working through courts, or working with in any kind of like the legal system, obviously people in authority are going to be big things there. Or of course, even more mundane, less kind of scary, I guess we'll say, like your boss, things like that. That's kind of that person in authority to think for with Sirius. I'm sorry. Cats, people in authority, creatures in authority. Creatures have authority over you. Cats can be really great for. Sirius is also used to help repair relationships, especially marital relationships or like serious long-term romantic relationships. Very helpful for helping to reconcile between spouses. And also, Sirius is said to give power over the air, which is something that I interpret and I have used in the past for weather magic. I forgot, or like bringing rain, that kind of thing. I forgot what my word was for a second there. A small note about Sirius, something that I have found very helpful, is that the stone of Sirius is beryl. So that's the stone that you would want to incorporate in any kind of Sirius talisman. There are different kinds of beryl, and I've had a lot of success specifically with heliotrope, like the helio. What's that? What it's called? Heliotrope is a plant. Hold on, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. Stone heliotrope. No, that's not it. Yellow beryl is called Heliodor. That's what it is, not heliotrope. There is a stone called heliotrope. It's like the bloodstone, but Heliodor is what I have used in the past to great success. So I recommend that. There are other kinds of beryl. Aquamarine is a kind of beryl. I don't think that's a very good one for Sirius. And then what's the other one? It's like pink. It's morganite, right? Pink beryl. What's it called? Morganite. What is pink beryl? Morganite. Yes, I remember things sometimes. Okay, so there are three kinds of beryl that are popular: morganite, Heliodor, and aquamarine. And I like, yes, Lee? He hit me. I like Heliodor the best. So the next electional opportunity that we're going to have for the North America is going to be on November 16th at just before 8 p.m. at 1952. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 12th Lunar Mansion talisman. I really enjoy the 12th Lunar Mansion. It's one of the ones that it's probably my favorite of the waning moon talismans. Or the mansions that are more associated or aligned with that kind of giving away or waning power. The 12th Lunar Mansion is really good for aiding with separation, for helping to let go, for helping to grieve and let go of things like that, whether that's, breaking like a bad habit or just kind of like letting go or saying goodbye to something or someone who is no longer in your life for one reason or another, whether that's a conscious, not wanting them to be in your life anymore or, just something that has happened. The 12th Lunar Mansion can be really great at helping to kind of break that connection. Or kind of, weaken or mute that connection to make the grieving process and moving on a little bit easier. So I tend to recommend the 12th Lunar Mansion a lot for people who are struggling to let go of like a relationship, because obviously there comes a point in time where you have to, get back out there. But in this electional opportunity here in this chart, we have the moon in the 12th Lunar Mansion. She's going to be down here in the third house. And the third house is the moon's house of joy. So while we tend to prefer the first, the 10th, or the 11th more than we would the third I feel like is a good kind of fourth place house for the moon, with maybe like the 9th being number 5 and the 5th being number 6. So typically we would like the moon to be more angular, because that represents planets that are more angular. Represent kind of more power or more volume. They're more engaged, they're more involved, they're more noticeable and out there. That's something that we definitely want the moon to be in a Lunar Mansion talisman. The third house gives her sort of unique powers, we'll say, because that is the house that she is specifically associated with in the tradition. So the moon is in the third house, which, while not maybe our 1, 2, or 3, our top 3 priorities, is a good house for the moon to still be in. And in this chart, she is applying a very close square to Venus in Sagittarius. And I like so whenever we're talking about these kinds of talismans that focus on the more negative ones, that focus on like letting go or kind of being harsh or something like that, the aspect that we're going to have with the moon, that the moon is going to have next, is going to color that a lot, or that experience a lot. Aspects with benefics make that easier but drag it out. Aspects with malefics make it more difficult or like confrontational but make it go really quick. And that's going to be a personal decision. That's not something I can really make for you. It depends a lot on you as a person, and also what your specific situation is and what you're comfortable with doing. The square with Venus is going to make the process easier. It's going to be easier to let go, but it's going to drag out the process. So it's going to take a little bit more time. It's going to be easier. And what I mean by that is like, there's not going to be like fear of like a confrontation or like it's not going to be like an in-your-face kind of situation. It's going to be something that just kind of like peters out over time is probably the better way to think about it. Whereas with malefics, you see much more of like a hard cut, like cutting somebody out of your life versus just like ghosting somebody, I guess, is like to use very not awesome terms, I guess, but that's kind of the different flavor that you have with the benefic or malefics in this context. So definitely up to you if you're in a situation where you would rather just be done with it, rip the band-aid off kind of a thing. This election is probably not going to be great for that, but if you're somebody who's more like in the healing process, then this is probably really great. So our next and final electional opportunity for North America is going to be for November 20th at about 3:30 in the morning. This chart is set for 3:32. And this is going to be an opportunity for an Algorab fixed star talisman. Algorab is a star in the Corvus constellation, the wing of the crow, and it is associated with the choleric humor, so it's a bit more of like an angry, assertive, aggressive star, and it can be utilized to bring those qualities to an individual. So it is especially useful for somebody who needs to stand up for themselves more, who needs to be more assertive. And we would typically recommend it to individuals who are more phlegmatic in temperament, and the phlegmatic temperament is one that is primarily associated with like not wanting to stand up for yourself, being more of a doormat. It can also be a situation where like there's a medical component in it, individuals who feel like chronically fatigued, things like that, brain fog, things like that. Algorab can be really helpful in kind of like getting the fire in the system to get more energy, to get more exuberance, to get more expression, and to get more kind of outward momentum. Algrab can be really helpful for. It protects against spirits and illnesses. So if you're an individual who, we're entering flu season, I guess we've already started it, Algrab might be very helpful to help combat the flu, and also to protect against malevolent spirits. Algrab's really great for that. The downside is that Algrab is a star that is the only star, interestingly, that the texts talk about as having a negative side effect, probably like how we would call it today, in that Algrab is said to cause nightmares. So, just if you make an Algrab talisman, you start to have nightmares, that's why. Algrab is projected to about 13 degrees of Libra in the tropical zodiac, and that is why we have 13 degrees of Libra on the ascendant here. The moon can join the ascendant, can join that star applying to it, and at the same time the moon is applying a trine to Saturn here in Aquarius in the 5th house, and Saturn is one of the planets that Algrab is associated with. It is said to be of the nature of Mars and Saturn, so we would want a connection with either Mars or Saturn, but we would prefer Saturn in this instance because Mars is retrograde, and I don't really like to work with retrograde planets in magical contexts outside of like very specific applications. So all in all, everything looks good there. The moon is in a trine to Saturn, so she's not opposed it, she's not in square to it, none of the bad stuff is happening. And she's also not in a difficult aspect with Mars, which is very helpful, the ascendant as well. We do have Venus in Sagittarius as the ruler of the 1st house, so Venus kind of represents the individual for whom the talisman is going to be working for. And Venus is fine. She has recently kind of risen out from the beams, from combustion of the sun. So she's very new in her cycle, which I think is kind of interesting. But otherwise, not just she's in Sagittarius. She's just recently escaped combustion, but otherwise she's doing fine. So this could be a really great opportunity for an Algrab fixed star talisman if you are interested in one. So now we're going to go ahead and jump to the Australian continent, and they have 2 electional opportunities that we'll talk about. The first one is that opportunity for the 9th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 9th Lunar Mansion, especially in a waning moon phase, is one that we are primarily associating with spiritual deflection, cleansing, and banishing. So it's the washing off stage of like the spiritual hygiene or protection practice. It's not the putting up wards stage. It's the casting out, the getting rid of stage. That's what we're primarily utilizing it for. And here we have the moon conjoined the ascendant in the 9th Lunar Mansion while she's applying the trine to the sun. Of course, I always enjoy myself a good sun-moon trine when I can get it. But especially in cases like this, because the sun is a planet that is associated with cleansing, with healing, it's that light that banishes the shadow kind of a thing going on, and that's exactly what we were looking for with the 9th Lunar Mansion. I also really like the sun-moon connection with this specifically because in the image for the 9th Lunar Mansion, the person is covering their eyes, and there is there's a deep Greek connection between the eyesight, and affecting the soul, and the sun and the moon represent the eyes. So I think that's a really neat symbol to have in the election for the 9th Lunar Mansion. Just that fun little thread that runs through it about the eyes and how they influence the soul. So that's a fun thing, a fun occult philosophical mechanism, I guess we'll say, that we can incorporate here. At the same time, Lee's fur gets all over me, and so it gets in my nose, and that's why I keep scratching my nose. And here he's like, yes, me? I would love to. Yes, I would love to. I would love to do that. But the moon, no, he's trying to be a furry tornado again. So the moon is on the ascendant, but she also rules the 1st house. So we don't have to worry about another planet to look at to make sure it's doing well, because Mars and Saturn are both averse to the moon in this chart, and that is exactly what we want to keep from happening. Our second and our final electional opportunity for Australia is going to be unique to Australia, and this is going to be an opportunity for a 15th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now, the 15th Lunar Mansion is one that can kind of go either way, waxing or waning, just like the 9th one. It's not super uncommon for lunar mansions to have kind of waxing or waning applications. But for the 15th Lunar Mansion and waning, when the 15th Lunar Mansion is waxing, we tend to utilize it more for branding, for positive business decisions or outcomes. While it's waning, we're thinking more about like reputation management for the suppression of rumors or kind of like bad malediction against you. Or people that you are like people in your circle. So the 15th Lunar Mansion is especially very useful and helpful for suppressing rumors, for kind of keeping your name out of other people's mouth, essentially, especially in the waning moon phase. Whereas in a waxing moon phase, we might utilize that similar power to put your name into somebody else's mouth for positive things, right? For for positive feedback or for kind of word of mouth advertising or things like that. So 15th Lunar Mansion can be very useful for, kind of like I said, general reputation management, and you're going to alter that depending on if the moon is waxing or if the moon is waning. Waning, we're going to suppress rumors, suppress bad talk about ourselves or about, for people or whatever. In our election, we have the moon in the 3rd house at the very beginning of the 15th Lunar Mansion. So be wary of that. The 15th Lunar Mansion begins at 0 degrees Libra even, so 0 Libra 0 0. And in this chart, she is applying the sextile to Mercury in Sagittarius, which I actually think is very beautiful for like rumors, for helping with rumors and assisting with that kind of in the shadows work for, kind of that thing. I think that's super cool. Those of you who know will probably recognize that Mercury here is combust. And generally, I do not like this moon applying to combust planets in elections. I'm sorry, I know that I keep like itching my nose, but I wish you could see. You probably can't see it, but I wish you could just see like the little fur that is everywhere. It's like snowflakes in here, and it just gets on my face, and I can't brush Lee. His fur is too fine. It doesn't work. So it's just all over. It's all over my desk. I'm very sorry. I know I probably look ridiculous, but it's just like it won't get out of my nose. Anyway, Mercury, of course, being a planet about rumors and words and speech and things like that, is very appropriate for this kind of connection. I also really do enjoy the combust nature of it, because combust planets tend to work like in the shadows. There's a theme of like invisibility or sneaking that we think about with combust planets, especially if that is a combustion that is separating, like Mercury is moving away from the sun. So Mercury is just starting its synodic cycle. Mercury is moving away from the sun. So Mercury is kind of safer coming out of it, whereas I would probably be much more cautious about this if Mercury was on the other side applying to the sun. I wouldn't like that as much. So, but anyway, looking to make sure the moon is doing well. She's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's in a sign that, like in a trine, a sign that's in trine to those planets, but not immediately impacted by them. The ascendant is also free. The 5 degrees Cancer is also free from the malefic aspects. So all in all, just a really fun chart, especially for a chart like this. You would want to make sure, absolutely sure, that the malefics are not involved, because that's the last thing that you want, is to make bad things more amplified. So I enjoy that both Mars and Saturn are in what are classically considered dark houses. So there's not like we're covering up, and kind of taking out bad things that people might say about us. So keep that in mind if you find yourself in the middle of a controversy, or would generally like to not be involved in such, workplace gossip, or, what grocery store gossip, church gossip, wherever people gossip, online gossip, wherever people gossip. If you'd like to see yourself not involved in it, then delete your social media and make yourself a 15th Lunar Mansion talisman. And that is all for Australia. Unfortunately, Western Europe is not going to get any talismanic opportunities really this go around, and that is primarily because the difference in the moon position makes it very difficult to get the moon applying to planets that I want her to, while she is in houses that I want her to be in. That tends to be the main problem, and so I'll give you a great example of what I mean by that. So both North America and Australia had opportunities for 9th Lunar Mansion talismans, yeah. So I was hoping that Western Europe would also have an opportunity for that as well, but I wasn't able to get it to work, and this is why. So the 9th Lunar Mansion starts, I'm going to go ahead and write this down here. The 9th Lunar Mansion starts at 12 Cancer, please bear with me, 12 Cancer 51. So that's the degree that the moon has to be passed before the moon can be considered in the 12th Lunar Mansion. So you can see that here the moon's on the ascendant, which is a position that I typically like her to be in, but she's in 9.5 degrees of Cancer, so I can't do anything with that. That she's not in the right mansion. She's still in the 8th. So I can move the moon forward, and in the 11th house, which is another house that I would tend to look for, we're still not even there yet. We're still at 1150. So I would go into the 10th, and I can get her there on the midheaven. But then what ends up happening is Venus rules the first house, and Venus is still combust. And the 9th Lunar Mansion is not necessarily one that I would like them. I don't really like the ruler of the first house being combust at all. Especially for like a waning, a little bit more like a negatively oriented, we'll say, talisman. I wouldn't really want that. That makes me uncomfortable, I'll say. If you are not uncomfortable with this, then 4:06 a.m. Would be what you would shoot for on November 13th. So there you go. That's a kind of a nasty-ish looking 9th Lunar Mansion talisman. So moving along from there, we're going to go, and the moon in the 9th house can work. It's not my favorite. Like I said, it's like the number 5 position. I tend not to go there unless I have to. Unfortunately, that's going to mean choosing either between the Libra ascendant and the Venus in Scorpio combust the sun. It's only 6 degrees away, which isn't great. Or the alternative is to wait a little bit later, to where you now have the Scorpio ascendant with Mars retrograde, and I don't like it when the ruler of the first house is retrograde. So I didn't like that either. And then we have to go all the way until the moon is in the 5th house for a potential other opportunity. And if we put her there in the 5th house, then we have Saturn as the ruler of the first house, but with Saturn we'll be in the 12th house, and I don't like the ruler of the first and the 12th house. So this is my problem. Every time I look at this, it would just be something I didn't like, particularly in regards to the ruler of the first house, because that's just how it goes sometimes. And then we can move the moon forward again until she's in the 3rd house, which is a better position, fortunately. But then we have kind of the same problem, right? That you guys are probably catching on to. Venus would then rule the 1st house. Venus is still combust. Our alternative would be to get the ascendant to be in Gemini, and then Mercury rules the 1st house, who is also combusted the sun. So that's why the 9th Lunar Mansion didn't really work out for us, because then when you finally get to the ascendant in the 9th Mansion, like the 9th Mansion goes to 25 Cancer 42, then you've missed the trine with the sun, and now you're going to like a trine with with Mercury. That's not the same. Not close to the same kind of energy, or the same kind of symbolism. Like not even close. Totally blew it. And so that's why. Like that's just kind of the idea. So taking that into consideration, I will say that the opportunities for the fixed stars, Sirius and Algorab, that North America had are a big maybe. Yeah. So what I mean by that is, if we go back in time here, to where we would have the moon conjoin that Sirius election to talk about. So my first initial reaction would be to put the moon on the midheaven, have 14 degrees Cancer on the midheaven, which is the degree that Sirius is associated with in the tropical zodiac. And then let that work, because the moon is still trine to the sun. And we're done. Unfortunately, we still have that ruler of the first house problem. Libra is on the ascendant. Venus is combust. I'm not comfortable with that. The only other alternative would be to put the moon on the ascendant, like it was on the North American version. Put 14 degrees on the ascendant as well, and then just use this. This would be the best that I could do for a serious talisman for Western Europe. 14 degrees of Cancer is on the ascendant. The moon is applying to 14 degrees of Cancer, but it's just like barely hanging on to angularity here. I'd use what's called the 5-degree rule. So planets that are within 5 degrees forward of a house cusp are considered to be in that house. So the moon at 9 degrees and a half of Cancer is within 5 degrees of the 14 on the ascendant. So I would consider it angular, but it's like it's just so barely hanging on to it that I would not be surprised. We still have this trine to the sun here, though. Oops. We still have that trine to the sun. But I would not be surprised if making this Sirius talisman is just not super effective, because of that, that barely hanging on. So I offer this to you, Western Europe, on November 12th at around 8:30 p.m. 2029 as a potential Sirius fixer talisman, but I'm just not super endorsing it. I guess we'll say it's an option. It's there. I hate it that you guys don't really have a really great electional opportunity to work with during this 2-week period. maybe you can make something out of the Sirius talisman or out of the Sirius election, even though it's barely hanging on there. The same thing could be said about the Algorab election that occurs on, let me get there, on, what day is this? On November 20th. Algorab is at 13 degrees of Libra in the tropical zodiac. So you can do something very, very similar where you have the moon at 8 degrees at 8:43 and the ascendant at 13. And again, just barely within that 5 degrees to keep that angular, and just so barely hanging on there that you would have to be super fast for whatever you do to even get like a taste of it. At the same time, the moon is applying to still the trine to Saturn. It's a bit further away, 11 degrees out. So that's kind of what you're playing with, this kind of like tenuous grasp of both angularity, but then also the moon's aspect, which are a little bit further out than they were in the North American version. So, here are maybe elections that you could utilize. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see a lot of success in them, which I really hate. And like, I hate to offer it and then be like, but you're probably not going to get anything out of it. But I would be surprised if you got a lot of use out of these fixed star talismans, because the moon is so barely angular and so barely with an orb of those planets. But maybe that's all you need. Maybe that's just that little push is all that you really need to get something concrete or constructive out of them. So hopefully that is the case. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here today. That was all of the electional opportunities that I had to share with you. I'm glad that we were able to get some asterisk for Western Europe there after a little bit of not really having any at all to work with. And it's interesting that we're kind of starting to see more come up now that the eclipses are in the rear view mirror, though many of us are of course still dealing with a lot of the themes or the threats, we'll say, that the eclipses introduced us to. So please be gentle with yourself. If you're kind of going through a rough time right now, that's totally fine. Many of us are. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully now that this has started to open up more, we'll have more we'll continue to have more elections to be able to talk about and share with you guys, so that you can continue to practice making astrological talismans. Thank you guys so much for watching. A big shout out to all my patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you would like to support the channel and the cats, I have cats to feed, you may have noticed, please consider signing up for the Patreon. You get bonus content, access to all kinds of fun stuff, community interactions, all that good stuff, presents sometimes. So please consider checking that out. And I will see you all again at the Sagittarius New Moon.